Okay, welcome to all listeners to today's episode of Last Enclosure. As ever, this is
Mike,
and I'm Nick. And we have a kind of
I think before that, let's kind of give listeners a little bit of description about Last Enclosure. What is it that we do here?
Yes, please.
This is a new podcast, so we're still figuring out the format. But effectively, Last Enclosure is us looking at a lot of the ways in which the modern world is extracting value from ordinary people, right? In order to sustain, these companies with high valuations, in order to sustain these high profits, right? And even in terms of our democracy, right? Taking power from the people and, not giving it back, right? So we're looking at the ways in which we are being enclosed and, hopefully by empowering you to see this trend of people taking power, taking profits, you can, live differently, vote differently, right? We also want to build a community of people, like-minded people who can look at these problems from this angle and collectively come up with better solutions.
The first step towards escaping the trap is knowing that there is a trap. And in this era of constant crisis, of, technological intrusion, economic exploitation, we are identifying the shape, the size, and the parameters of this enclosure. Anybody who's been locked in a conversation with an economist or a student of economics knows the original enclosure movement began at the sort of the dawn of capitalism, the transition out of the mercantile era. And that was just simply the commons being enclosed by the king and his landed gentry, and it proceeded apace. It began to gobble up industry, and each era there was some new method of enclosing and looping around the choices and behaviors of people and labor. And now we find ourselves at the last enclosure, which is the human mind itself. And hopefully our little message, our little mission is to bring that to you all in, I don't know, an entertaining, pithy way, maybe, like if we do it right.
That's the hope.
That's the hope.
Yeah. So with that said, let's dive into today's episode. This is, I believe, either our third or fourth episode, depends on how I cut it. And we're kind of digging in. We've been digging into AI in the last several episodes, not because we're trend hoppers, but because it is important to understand. There's a lot of confusion around what this is. I think people are now grappling with the fact it's a bubble, but what does that mean, right? And how did we get here, right? There are a handful of people, I think, who are doing a good job of conveying the story, but they have not, or they are just now beginning to enter mainstream. Someone like Ed Zitron, right, who is doing digging into the financial guts of this story. But, I think most people kind of not getting good clarity, good, details about kind of what this is, because a lot of people are benefiting from the confusion and the ambiguity around AI. And it's just sort of like, I think this information should be freely available. And as someone who is sort of a little bit of an industry insider and someone who has a political economy background, I kind of have been uniquely in a position to actually understand what's going on the entire time. And I want to share that with you guys.
Yeah, normally we sort of end up in what comedian Patton Oswalt described our nerdiness getting in the way of our geekiness. But actually, in this moment, our nerdiness hopefully is uniquely positioned in place to help. So fingers crossed in that sense. But yeah, today we're going to hopefully avoid falling into the rabbit hole of looking at the polycrisis and instead trying to nail down some of the specific elements of the AI bubble within the context of this moment of crisis. And so let's rattle off a few of these factors, and maybe we can sort of not blow through them quickly, but responsibly. If you wouldn't mind, Michael, can we talk briefly about the Strait of Hormuz?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, obviously, we're currently at war, if you didn't know.
It's tough to tell.
It is tough to tell. I think being, a late stage empire, and everyone uses late stage, but I'm trying not to use it ironically. You
We're
know,
using it analytically, therefore it's better somehow.
we're not going to feel like we're at war because, these are done far afield, and so, you know, but what we are going to feel obviously are the financial effects of the war, and you know, slowly but surely as the last cargo empties out of the strait, the last barrels of oil, so to speak, right, and countries kind of eat into their reserves, the normalcy of the moment, which, to the extent that there is, and I want to appreciate this fact because obviously before the war people were struggling, but like we have not, unfortunately, to say we've not really hit the impacts of the war on top of that prior struggling. So the relative normalcy will likely end up going away. I've not been following the exact details of the reserves, but some people I've heard numbers or indications that maybe by midsummer we could be hitting tighter shortages. You
And
know,
certainly gas prices have already been impacted. They're being driven up. Like we've seen the initial stages of it.
yeah. So there will come a point, obviously, where the crisis at the Strait will definitively impact the broader economy, not just in terms of the price of gas, but as gas is an input to everything we do, and we live in a material economy, despite the kind of magic marvels of the modern world. That's an input to electricity generation, right? It's an input to transportation of food and minerals and resources. The Strait is also kind of relevant to the AI story because there are technology specific materials that actually travel through the Strait too. And so, indirectly, you've actually got literally a stranglehold on the AI economy via the Strait of Hormuz. Now, obviously, again, there are lag effects. There's a time delay, but at some point, this impact will be priced into the AI economy as we are currently experiencing it. And I don't know if you all have noticed, but
And this is because AI growth will also be downstream of energy prices going up and energy constriction.
yeah, but independently of that, AI as normal actually itself is not very profitable. So, you know, a lot of these AI companies, specifically the startups, Anthropic, OpenAI, XAI, if you want to include Mecha Hitler as a contender, you know, they are subsidizing their product to a substantial degree. Like numbers kind of vary on what the actual cost is, but I think one of the last numbers I saw was that OpenAI had an operating margin of negative 133%. I think it's basically for every dollar they're making, they're losing 33 cents. And I think that was up from a previous number. So this this is without even talking about the economics of energy playing a role constraining the profitability or lack thereof of AI, right?
Because the
So
margins are already so tight that there's no way for them to play with it.
yeah, so they were playing economics on easy mode and they couldn't make any money. When the energy becomes scarce, they're going to be playing on hard mode, and if they could make money on easy mode,
Yeah.
there's no way they're going to make money on hard mode. And as much as we kind of treat billionaires and such as boogeymen, they don't have infinite money. Even if they tried to bail out a company like say Oracle or whatever, there's no assets really to buy in the case of at least AI companies. And also the the recurring need for money means that effectively this is a bottomless pit, right? Normally, when you do a bailout, there's at least something that's salvaged. If there's nothing to purchase, if there's nothing to gain, then there's really no bailout. Now, whether or not any of these individuals, like a Sam Altman or Dario Amodei or whatever, get their exit liquidity and are personally made whole, I mean, sure, right? I mean, sure, that's possible with this story. OpenAI and Anthropic are racing to go public so that these people can have their exit cash.
Their
Elon,
own little golden
right?
parachutes and such, yeah.
As of recording, Elon just had his company, SpaceX, which merged with XAI, you know, enter the market, right? So, like, question of whether or not individuals will be made whole, or is separate from whether or not the industry can be bailed out. There's no bailout if there's really nothing the money can actually resuscitate or serve. So, AI is likely, it's not going away. I think there's residuals. A lot of my writing at Misaligned Markets has been trying to figure out what those residuals are. Unfortunately, I've not seen very good reporting or very good discussion of what the residuals are. I have my own theories and we can get into that. But, you know, aside from these residuals, the current crop of AI companies and the current way we use AI is not going to last. And I think it's become increasingly apparent. I mean, everyone has been felt comfortable saying it's a bubble, and as of time of recording, we've got Edgitron, the king, bubble, caller himself on mainstream media. He was on Bloomberg recently, and he was on Chris Hayes' podcast. So he's doing the rounds with the normies now. So everyone is now literally saying things he was saying 3 years ago about this not being sustainable.
If previously fringe analysts are now the ones being brought on to talk about the existence of the bubble, now
Right.
mainstream media has admitted that that's what's happening.
And media was asking about a bubble as early as October 2025, and that's why I wrote my post in March. I had started it actually December 2025, and I
Yeah.
I didn't publish till March because I was verifying some stuff. But media has kind of been slowly playing footsies with this question, so it's not like this is the first time that they're asking it. But I think the identification of Zitron's thesis at this stage means we're probably at the latest part of the bubble,
Mhm.
right? So any day now, likely, sooner than later, but I don't think it's imminent, but it's pretty soon. We're going to start seeing signs like, incomplete data centers, because a lot of this stuff is built on debt too, right? So it's a little messy trying to map out the bubble, but you've got multiple layers of things going on. So AI bubble, you know, means a lot of things. So there's the question of the profitability of these AI companies, right? So the companies that are actually providing AI products and services, there are dozens of them, but the only ones that actually matter are Anthropic and OpenAI. And I keep wanting to say XAI, but they're kind of like the kid eating glue in the back, um, in terms of like enterprise services and whatnot. Because the way Elon did his AI is just less reliable for serious work. Now, obviously, if you want to do illegal photos and other unsavory things, then Mecha Hitler's your guy. But in terms of actual like drawing of the AI economy, it's being driven by OpenAI and Anthropic. So
Right, Grok will not save him.
so this is layer one, right? You've got these companies. The question is, are they profitable? They're not profitable. The question is, can they get profitable, right? There are people who see these products, they are wowed. We've been talking about this for the last few posts, right? I referred to large language models specifically, which is the current paradigm driving almost all discussion of AI. I I tend to like to separate AI apart from its constituent components, because when we lump everything together, we get confused about what is driving value. There are lots of AIs that are not expensive piles of dog crap,
Mm.
right? There are like models for predicting climate. There are models for you know
For like
modeling.
medical specific
Right.
research, things
And
like that.
there's
Yeah.
even generative AI that is being used. Generative AI is sort of the technology driving large language models. There's even generative AI that's being used in these more technical applications. So I want to be careful kind of having those distinctions in play, because, it helps us to talk, specifically about what it is that is driving the bubble and what technologies are likely to remain, right? So the bubble is being driven predominantly by large language models and generative AI that is used for general business applications, as opposed to more technical applications like medical imaging or whatever, right? There's like a separate set of technologies that are of the same crop, but are not from OpenAI and Anthropic. To give you an example, Stanford and NVIDIA have a generative pre-trained transformer, not a large language model, called um,
See our first episode for these important distinctions.
called Evo, and this model basically can predict gene sequences, right? So it'll be useful in genomics research, in bioinformatics, stuff like that, and the utility of that, is sort of independent of the utility of, say, a ChatGPT, which also has that generative pre-trained transformer in its name. That's where GPT comes from. It's just a general application or general technique for developing a transformer, which is the technology driving all of generative AI right now. So whether or not Evo is useful is a separate question from if ChatGPT will make money, right? In fact, OpenAI does not own Evo. They do not use Evo. The fact that Evo exists is sort of irrelevant to whether or not Sam Altman will have to sell everything and cry himself to sleep because he loses money, right? And in knowing that is important, right? So let's go back to the core question. What is the bubble in? The bubble is in these consumer slash enterprise services that are providing large language models that are predominantly for office work, knowledge work, making images, right? Doing stuff that feels productive for a young knowledge worker and or a polymath who is doing research, right? That is sort of where the bubble is, right? And the big question is, okay, even if it feels useful to you, I know there are those of us who have our qualms about, the ethical nature of these companies and ethical nature of the product, but there are people who feel these are useful. Even if it's useful to you, if you're not paying the real price, then what is its actual value, right?
And because it's being subsidized, like we just talked about, that's another element of why it's being driven up. That's feeding this bubble.
Right. And so this is one layer of the bubble, right? There's a bubble in these startups, right? And I focus heavily on OpenAI and Anthropic because downstream of them are a bunch of other AI startups, but their products, those secondary AI companies, they are just making API calls to OpenAI and Anthropic. In computer science, API basically is just a way to get two different programs to talk to each other, right? So say I make AIB, right? AIB has maybe it's let's just say it's like this is a good example. I think there's a law tech firm called Harvey, and they are doing kind of like paralegal slash, junior associate level legal work using large language models, right? Harvey, as far as I know, does not have their own proprietary models. They are making API calls to an OpenAI and Anthropic.
So they're entirely dependent on
Yeah.
the Anthropic services.
So Harvey, the existence of Harvey does not actually even indicate that there's demand for anything other than OpenAI and Anthropic, right? And so if OpenAI and Anthropic go away, then Harvey goes away.
Because they're not profitable,
Right.
the knock-on effects, the second-order effects are
Right.
devastating.
So we can call these companies that make API calls, we can call them wrappers, right? Because basically they are wrapping up ChatGPT and OpenAI into their product and service. And so if OpenAI and Anthropic go away, like I've been saying, these secondary companies go away too, right? So a lot of people are saying, hey, look, there's very clearly a bubble in the secondary market of wrapper companies, but also one level up, the big boys, OpenAI and Anthropic, are themselves not profitable. So, that's layer 2 of the bubble where it's like, you got these startups kind of that are providing these services that are not profitable. Now, layer 3, independently of OpenAI and Anthropic and these AI services that people use and feel are valuable, you've got a bubble in the infrastructure of AI. Okay, so in order to serve these large language models, be it via a wrapper company or via OpenAI, Anthropic, or Google or Amazon, right? Because Google and Amazon have their own models too. There's a data center build out, right? They are buying GPUs, they're buying land, they're buying electricity, they're buying
They're
all these.
sucking up water, and
Right. So
this might be, I also should highlight, this might be the layer that the public is the most familiar with because it generates kind of the most news clicks. Like there's a data center coming into a small town in Tennessee or whatever else, and then it becomes a political story locally and might get picked up nationally. So this is kind of maybe the more visible side of it.
yeah. And so one big part of this the reporting, that I've seen is that a lot of the data center build out, well, one, it's not happening at the clip and scale that is being reported. Obviously, when a data center rolls up to your town, it's personal, it's very, gritty, and it's a huge impact on your cost of living and your quality of life.
Because it's driving up energy costs that are having to be borne by these communities
Right.
in a time period when the
We're
Strait of
already-
Hormuz is still closed. So like it's other
Right.
pieces of it. Yeah.
But in terms of the actual industry's kind of capability and scale, data centers are behind schedule. They've kind of booked more data centers than can be probably built in the time before the bubble pops. And increasingly, many of these data centers are being funded with debt that may not ever be recovered. It's sort of like a '08 crisis situation. So in '08, we had collateralized assets, basically people borrowing against mortgages and such on the basis that houses will be built forever, right? They couldn't build houses fast enough. But, housing prices were not going to go up forever, and in order to sustain housing prices, you had to issue more and more debt, right? Debt that maybe was subprime, that was riskier, right? People getting mortgages that they can't afford, right? Just to have bodies in houses, to have revenue payments to people owning these mortgage-backed assets, right? So something similar is happening in the data centers where you basically have, physically cannot build data centers quickly enough. Increasingly, to get more data center, the demand for data centers is being funded with debt. The debt is not even coming from, you could, at least with the '08, you could say debt's coming from banks, and banks are sort of like, I don't say they're good for it, right? But banks have specific types of regulations and specific types of financial structures that make them more transparent in terms of like where the money is going, et cetera. A lot of the debt in the data center build out is coming from what are known as NEDFIs or NEBFIs. So it's non-depository financial institutions or non-banking financial institutions.
This is very nebulous money that, not to say that there's any kind of conspiracy around it, just that it's unaccountable and untraceable to the public in ways that we've been used to before.
Yeah, so you may have heard terms like shadow banking or private credit. That's basically what this is. And so, you know, due to the '08 crash, a lot of banks had new types of regulations that had them, basically constrain them in terms of capital requirements. So they had to have certain amount of money on hand, right? And having to have certain amount of money on hand means you can't lend as much, which means you're not making as much money. And so naturally, a gap in the market formed for entities that could kind of more quickly, distribute capital and money. But these entities were not beholden to the same types of regulations as banks. And so, as private credit has grown, the risk that they've taken in order to enter new markets like AI data centers has grown enormously too. You've got like multiple people kind of basically over leveraged in these markets, themselves lending money, right? And so when the chickens come home to roost, if you're taking on debt to give out debt, right, then there's nothing here.
Also, dodging the regulations. The regulations were put into place to prevent subsequent bubbles and crises from occurring. So getting around them means these people are chasing the trend, they are chasing the bad ideas that don't have solid underlying like economic value or support,
There probably is a case for some private credit,
but not to the extent that we're talking about here.
Yeah, 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 of course. I mean,
This is outrageous.
right.
Let's emphasize that.
Yeah, yeah. So I think a gap like this naturally was going to invite this type of risk taking. Obviously, regulators asleep at the wheel should have woken up sooner, right?
Or that are simply captured by the industry itself, and that's its own kind of political problem.
Right. But, now that the NetFis have entered the chat, right, so to speak, and they are the ones sort of participating in the beta data center build out, at some point, someone's going to say, hey, look, I can't lend you any more money. I'm out. Like we took too much debt to take out the money. The other thing actually too is that independently of the NetFis, so the NetFis are getting money from banks too. They're actually going to banks to borrow. Banks themselves are also lending money for the data center build out. So I'm saying at some point there will not be enough money. There will not be enough return to justify any more lending. When that happens, data center build out stops. People who are invested in AI, be it Anthropic or via the stock market, Google, et cetera, will say, hey, look, the data center build out's slowing. Does that mean that I should pull my investments from AI into a more profitable sector? Right. And so this is sort of like,
It kind of creates a cliff,
right,
essentially,
this is a
ahead of
chain
it.
of
Yeah,
logic that will lead to the bubble. Now,
right.
when people will realize that, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you. But like the fact that people like Zitron are being brought onto mainstream media means people are starting to ask these questions. Right. This is again the late stage of the bubble where people are asking questions like, where are all the data? Why are we building all these data centers? What is driving the demand for this? Is there actually demand outside of OpenAI and Anthropic for AI services? Right? Because again, a lot of the demand for AI services is being brought upon by OpenAI and Anthropic, not doing again technical research like the Evo model I talked about. Right.
Which has its own underlying value.
Right. Its own underlying value, and critically enough, does not require orders of magnitude of compute and energy and water and et cetera to run, right? So I'm saying the very bespoke, very purpose-built AI, technology that is independent of OpenAI and Anthropic, that is independent of large language models, does not require all of this energy and resource
It
to.
doesn't require infinite resources in the future to drive, and also is answering a specific use case.
Right. The reason why these AI companies are the main ones, OpenAI, Anthropic, and downstream of them, the wrappers are getting so much funding and requiring so much compute is because what they are trying to sell us is this idea of capital as labor, right? So it's a machine that can do anything a human can, right? Can literally be a one-to-one substitution for labor or a human being in this case, and in order to kind of keep the illusion going, right? The Wizard of Oz kind of behind the curtain, the man behind the curtain, so to speak, is literally just add more compute, more compute, more compute, more compute. And like on the margins, more compute has gotten us kind of models that are, say, more capable than models from earlier. I think in the last episode I was talking
Right. So
about.
there have been gains. Yeah. And we've touched on it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
for
touched on
sure.
this in the last episode. Like I was surprised that the jump between GPT-2 and GPT-3.5 to me, it was a big jump.
And here's also where a kind of stricter economic analysis is useful. Economists, at the very least, should recognize when the low hanging fruit has been gotten. Data analysts and data scientists are telling us we've gotten all the low hanging fruit in terms of training these models and data ingestion. There is more value to be gotten, but there's less easy pickings to be had. So it'll only get pricier and less capacity growth from now on.
Yeah, the other thing is that, so within the computer science, we talked about this in the last episode too. There's the idea of scaling laws, right? So scaling provided some fraction of the value we've gotten out of going from GPT-1, whatever that was, right, to GPT-5, whatever. But a lot of the current value arguably is being driven by scaffolding or harnesses, which actually are built for purpose code or computer tooling that helps the model navigate the world. We talked about the analogy of Grandpa Shelby in one of the earliest episodes, right? Helping a model that cannot learn in real time navigate a world where it's given that its associations are locked in time. It has amnesia, right? So if you have, for example, Claude Code is a bunch of rules that kind of tell Claude where to get information about the newest updates to a programming language, for example, right? Because it does not have that information in its training data. And so what has happened, at least this is my view, and I've seen this echoed elsewhere, is scaling had real gains, right? Scaling meaning making the models bigger, and making the models bigger requires more electricity, et cetera, right? But at some point, scaling had diminishing returns. But instead of telling the public that, a lot of these frontier labs, which are OpenAI, Anthropic, they just began kind of building tooling and other coding infrastructure while pretending it was all the energy, data, resources going into the actual material layer of the AI contributing to the value, right? And so the reason they did this is because, one way that companies are signaling, at least the hyperscalers, these are hyperscalers, a company that is building data centers. One way that they're signaling fitness is by, scheduling demand for new chips, scheduling demand for new hardware and resources at the infrastructure layer, because that tells the markets, hey, we're serious about this. We're putting our money where our mouth is. We're buying more resources to keep this thing going, right? But it's a fitness signal. It's not necessarily even,
It's performative. Let's put that term to it.
yeah.
Yeah,
But the incentive is, as long as the market is rewarding you for saying, I want to buy 1 billion GPUs, I'm exaggerating, obviously,
sure.
you're going to keep doing that, right? You're kind of locked into whatever kind of paradigm that your incentives allow you to be in, right?
Flash forward to tomorrow when somebody comes on or Elon or something like, I'm buying 1 million GPUs, or 1 billion GPUs. Like,
I
okay,
mean, we
great.
kind of had that because, I mean, SpaceX's prospectus for its IPO was
Right.
that we're going to put data centers in space.
Space, which of course is infinitely large, therefore that's the sky's the limit, literally, for this company. Sarcastically speaking right now.
No, you don't want to go to Mars? He's going to take us to Mars.
My God, I'm such a downer. I
You
don't
don't want to
think
be like Matt Damon in The Martian? And okay, so
look forward to a future episode where we look at Mars, the idea of Mars, the madness of Elon Musk, and what the hell was Interstellar. A lot of fertile ground here for discussion.
yeah, so where this leaves us is we're very obviously in a bubble, but the actors are going to keep playing this game because their incentives require them to. They have, billions of
They're
dollars.
locked in
They're locked in.
financially, professionally, reputationally. They can't change.
Right. They
Right.
have billions of dollars in equity and or, potential earning, whatever. They're also on the hook for deals that they owe people based off these promises, right? So they are literally like if you're looking for a sign for the companies to back down and just go, oh, we got you guys, it's a bubble, they're never going to do that. They're going to the last, death throes of the bubble, they're going to
Mhm.
keep pretending everything's fine. And they're gonna even make more ambitious plays that look like they're building out new infrastructure and new things that are, until again the layers below it, the debt, the Strait of Hormuz, right, the energy layer, the debt layer, the infrastructure layer, when those crumble, then the confidence game ends and the bubble implodes. And unfortunately, because the AI bubble is really like 3 or 4 bubbles combined. I've been kind of making the case of that throughout this conversation so far. It's going to have impacts on a lot of people who are not even, they're just bystanders, right? Had no investment in the bubble itself.
And you are very good at pointing out the fact that there's also these overlapping bubbles. Let's take the analogy one step further. When you've seen literally physically you blow a bubble and interacts and combines with 3 or 4 other bubbles. In physical space, those bubbles are not making each other stronger. One of them bursts, it pulls the whole thing with it. And, there are other bubbles here, like in the credit markets, not just on the corporate side,
Right.
but on issuance of personal credit and for small businesses and whatever else. These are being constrained too. Like this is part of just the economic moment that we're
Right.
in.
Yeah. So there is, and so yeah. So with that case, that there's several bubbles, right? Strait of Hormuz is itself a resource energy bubble. There's AI bubble, which itself is sort of infrastructure bubble, which is I think the bigger bubble. And then the AI application layer bubble, which is OpenAI and Anthropic not being profitable, and then downstream of them, obviously the wrapper companies I've been talking about, like Harvey, right? So those are like those are 3 bubbles, and then you know via the infrastructure bubble being propped up by private credit, private credit itself, if private credit has impacts from the infrastructure bubble, then you could say arguably it's a fourth bubble, right? That is distinct from the infrastructure layer, right? So private credit is funneling money they don't have into the AI infrastructure, right? If that itself causes private credit to contract, that is a kind of a fourth bubble, a fourth quasi bubble, right? So on top of these bubbles, you've got a macro economy that the average person will tell you is not doing well, right? I think even when you look at the job numbers, over the last like 2 months, I mean, a lot of the safety is coming from the fact that healthcare and AI build out are kind of the core places where jobs and value is coming from. If your economy is just, you know, building, you know, building what will effectively be like empty closets, right? For vacant GPUs that won't be there, and taking care of old people, you don't really have an economy, right? So in this multi bubble environment,
It's like, are you talking about Japan or the US? And like at a certain level, we can't tell. It's just on paper.
right? Yeah, and at a certain level, you've got these bubbles and a weak macro environment.
Hmm.
I mean, I hesitate to think about what this looks like when you put it all together. It's like literally gathering like 10 different grades of gasoline next to some dry brush. Like like that's sort of the imagery that's coming to mind for me. And again, I can't predict what will set what off. Maybe we get lucky and some of this is more contained than I've been laying it out.
There is sort of a three-body problem here where we don't know the economic gravitational effects of each of these independent bubbles because they are now affecting each other. So it becomes harder and harder to calculate what those gravitational effects are.
Right. On top of again, the macro environment itself
Right.
being very weak.
But none of it is good. None of
Right.
the indicators are good.
Right.
And, again, we're not sitting here trying to promote the idea of panic or reactivity, just better and better awareness. Let's take this down to a ground level. For example, in the 2008 scenario, individual families, companies, small firms, whatever have you, were on the hook. They had gotten mortgages, they had purchased first or second homes, right? So that was the underlying risk to the economy itself. Individuals were on the hook. Right now, we don't really have, unless you own stock in one of these companies or you're in an area where there's tax subsidies being given to these firms putting in or trying to put in data centers. We don't have individuals being put on the hook. But again, kind of what we've talked about before, now people are altering their career trajectories. They're altering what their upskilling looks like. They're being, in this very low fire, low hire labor market, there are people altering radically what their jobs are and who is being hired and in what numbers quarter on quarter. So there are individual effects that are very damaging and very impactful.
Yeah, I mean, people are actually on the hook, but in ways that they didn't
Or
consent
less
to
visible,
are less visible, right?
yeah, than
So
before.
your exposure to AI in your retirement accounts is unavoidable if you're in the U.S. stock market because stock market is just being now driven by solely the tech sector, right?
I also don't like the fact that previously we were putting more people into kind of solid, if not, you know, fully impressive coding programs. And now it's like, well, we don't need coders. We can just have you learn sort of the barest form of it, and then you go learn AI. It's like that's that's a that is a skill labor effect that is demonstrable and is now spreading.
I'm less worried about those effects. I think they're temporary in the sense that like once we agree that there's no God machine, right? Because the reason why they're scaling is they're trying to make a machine that can do everything. Capital is labor, right?
So after this bubble has burst, we can realign rather quickly.
Right.
See, there's
Um,
a hopeful message today.
there's a question for me of what the residuals are, and we can get into that.
Sure.
But given that there will be no God machine, even currently with the subsidies that software engineers are getting now, they are having they're finding that they're having to scope the AI and kind of constrain what it does because if they treat it like another employee,
Hmm.
right, then the effects are kind of bad. Now, if you are at the top 1% of programming, you know what a flaw looks like from like 1,000 miles away, right? You'll have an easier time kind of treating the AI like a dumb employee. But most people, and sort of like the average middle employee in most domains, they're good enough to do their job. But if you gave them a bunch of assistants that like were incompetent, say 20, 30% of the time, and the results were disastrous, those 20, 30%, they may not catch all those mistakes. And if you're moving at a velocity that's much faster than you were before, you're going to catch less mistakes, right?
Hmm.
And so AI, I should be more careful. Large language models via OpenAI, Anthropic are effectively they're force multipliers. But if you are like have like if you're like a bad employee, you have a negative impact on your company. It just makes you move faster to do worse things for the company, right? Similarly, if you're at the top, 1%, then fine, you'll get value out of it. But there's still the question of, can we pay for it, right? Because as we're seeing, even with the subsidies, companies are going to OpenAI and Anthropic asking for discounts. They're saying, "Whoa, I'm spending way more than I thought I was," right? So if you have a technology that is a force multiplier, but most of your employees are either mediocre or bad, is one, it's probably not a good force multiplier. But two, even for your top 1%, you're still not getting the revolutionary value that's being claimed, right? And so this means that when the bubble pops, very likely, yeah, people saying you don't need to code anymore, it's a thing of the past, is going to go away. Um,
Because it's foolish. I
right.
mean, yeah.
But software engineering has had this sort of FOMO through multiple cycles.
We're talking about a delusion a bit is
But
that's
I'm
what I'm
saying,
trying to understand.
but I'm saying like this type of delusion of X will replace Y is literally it happens all the time in hype cycles in technology.
Hmm.
And so someone who's a software, engineering veteran could tell you about this. So this is not new. I mean, maybe the order of magnitude to which we're all kind of experiencing this, right? 'Cause
I think it feels new to a lot of people,
no, no, it's new
without
because
extrapolating too
because of
much.
the magnitude of it. So I'm
Yeah.
saying normally these discussions only take place within the industry.
Yeah. Within
So
very rarefied
like
circles or
only people
yeah.
who are at the proximity of programming whatever
Right.
have these discussions, and then the hype cycle dies down, people move on. But because AI, specifically large language models and the frontier labs that have created them have kind of become the words on everyone's lips, everyone's having this discussion at the same time as opposed to just
Hmm.
software engineers, right? But yeah, that goes away. It changes when the bubble pops because the economics of this as is doesn't make sense. What will likely happen in terms of those residuals is you maybe have smaller language models that are used for a bespoke purpose, sort of like Evo, which is not a language model. Like I said, it's just a GPT.
We are also not sponsored by Evo, even though we've mentioned it multiple
Evo is open
occasions.
source, so if you want to go sync with some genes, have at
Right.
it, right? But at least I believe it is. But you know, having a smaller language model for a bespoke purpose will be cheap and or cheaper, and that is not a labor substitution. That is a productivity multiplier, right? And furthermore, doing that in a domain where you can measure the effects, right? Because another limitation of large language models is like a lot of the value you get out of a language model interaction is subjective. If you're just, especially if you're using it through the chat interface, right? It's sort of like you ask a question or you ask for something to be done. It gives you an output, and if you don't immediately know what you're looking for, you're kind of going off the vibe of the output. Like, oh, that looks right. I think this is right. This seems right. It seems right, right,
I've got embedded metrics. Surely there's value here.
right. It's not even a metric. It's just literally like, does the output look in the right shape for the thing you asked for, right? If you ask for, say, your apartment hunting, right, and it gives you a bunch of addresses or a bunch of places in the city, you know, looks right, right,
Right. That is objective data, maybe masquerading as real answers when in fact it very well may not be.
right.
Yeah.
You would have to go down to those locations and check them out, right, or call the people, right.
Yeah.
Obviously with a task like that, the stakes are pretty low. But if you as you go kind of up the chain in terms of like responsibility and obligation, you're going to have tasks that are harder to verify. And if you can't scope the model to a task that is measurable, then at some point you are relying on vibes to get you through. Is this a useful output?
I appreciate this moment to say, yeah, at some point vibes will destroy the economy. I've been saying it for a decade, and now it's finally coming true. In a very meaningful and measurable way. Yeah, so there's a piece of this too, kind of keeping it at the ground level. There's less and less talk that I've seen, in media circles and analytic circles of, oh, we're going to replace an entire cohort of workers. That's actually not a fear. That's not a
It
repeatable
was a
talking point.
fear, but now
It
it's
was
sort
a
of,
fear,
yeah,
exactly.
because Dario Amodei was going on TV saying, "I see a bloodbath for
Right. Yeah.
white collar
White
workers,"
collar workers getting wiped out.
and then he had Bernie Sanders could come talk to him. That's a whole thing and a half. I
That's something we'll look at someday for sure. That's a strange meeting that happened.
yeah, yeah,
A strange meeting of minds in an odd place for sure.
yeah,
So yeah, the discourse has now shifted where it's like, okay, well, we're not going to fire, you know, every white collar worker, but we will fire most of them because the productivity gains from one worker will now allow us to fire three for every one that we retain. So now worker retention looks much different. And even if it's not, even if it's not going to occur to that extent, you know, mid bubble, post bubble, that is the fear that is built into this discussion. It's
yeah.
built into the discourse of it.
But as I said in my article on misaligned markets, it's called "What to Expect When You're Expecting a Bubble."
Go check it out now, please.
Questions of substitution are not actually rooted in a technology's capability, and that's always been the case for every technology. Even if
And that is the hype cycle.
right,
Yeah.
even if a technology could replace a worker, right, or if it couldn't, right. What actually matters is what types of cost savings does the employer want, right? And so the AI bubble happened right after COVID. COVID, as we know, saw a historical kind of rise in hiring, at least for white collar knowledge workers, right? Having more kind of like flexibility in terms of working from home, like having basically labor had the strongest kind of, sorry, white collar labor had the most kind of the strongest working conditions it's had in a very long time. And AI was a perfect excuse to claw that back, right? The
All the gains made by this class
right.
mid COVID and after COVID.
Right. Even if AI was actually not doing what they said it was,
Yeah.
the justification was good enough that they could use it to claw back a lot of the benefits and a lot of the cost that they incurred kind of treating people better during COVID.
Hmm. Yeah, this is like also the return to work question. Like, oh, we got to end all this opportunities for remote work, and it's like, okay, at Yahoo, sure, like you can ruin your reputation and force all your workers back. I don't know what that gets you very much, but maybe it does just shift rebalances the power, I suppose.
Yeah. I don't know if you have any points, but I think there is an interesting question of sort of like, you know, why was this allowed to go on for so long? I think that's probably a question that a lot of people have. I have some thoughts on that, but I don't know if you have any like thoughts about like the bubble more generally, like any other things or aspects you wanted to ask about.
Yeah. Why don't we blue sky here a little bit more? Now that we've kind of laid out the demonstrable material elements of this, let's get a little wider here.
Right. Okay.
Again, without kind of subscribing to any given agenda or conspiratorial thinking, I do see this as capital trying to return and claw back the like you said, the gains of labor under COVID, a lot of which were, solidified and enhanced by Biden era policies that we, you know,
Sure.
approved of. Build Back Better, so many elements of that sort of funding package and that legislation was in response to this growth, and like, let's continue to build out. Right, this is a sort of political talking point, but it's also an economic principle. Build out from the middle and from the middle out, and
Sure.
the bottom up.
Right.
There was growth in these areas, not that we had necessarily fixed all the losses in the pay gap, in the wage stagnancy that hadn't been repaired, but so much had been done positively in that direction.
Yeah.
So like, millionaires and billionaires in their own sort of cohort are like, for whatever reason, this was their all in. This was like, oh, we're gonna reverse this tide of the strength of labor, and that's what we're witnessing.
Yeah. I mean, I want to caveat, and this is go listen to our last episode where we talked about the permanent underclass.
Right.
I think AI was just a tool on the table. When you look at the incentives of the actual actors building AI, I mean, there's a lot of them. We talked about there are people literally building AI engineers who are like, I can't wait for humans to be replaced, i.e., like terminated literally by a superior life form, right?
Right. This is the sort of Skynet
Delusion,
scenario. Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
the capitalists, their incentive obviously is there's a new tool on the table that can replace labor. Of course, they're going to grab it, right? But
Or it could appear to replace labor. Therefore, they'll go and sell it to everybody, even in the face of good reason and logic.
right. But again, you've got so many different incentives and motives here that I don't know that there's a clean story of.
I don't
Uh,
think there's a clean story either, and
yeah,
that's
yeah,
the
yeah.
thing. You're like,
But one consequence is that regardless of why AI exists, large language models in its current form, you've got you've got this thing that exists, and so people are pushing it in a way that they can cut labor, right? I don't know that the original inventors saw it that way. I think Sam Altman literally, when he looks at the mirror, sees nothing, right? No
right.
reflection, right? Because he's telling the tech bros, this will make you better, stronger. You'll avoid the permanent underclass. He's telling the capitalists what they want to hear. It'll replace labor. And then when that goes too far and spooks markets, he's like, oh, well, not all labor, of course, right? So he's just tailoring a message to whoever will hear him out, right? But your boss obviously is concerned with your company's costs, and so to their ears, this is I can cut labor and have lower cost, right? So that is a
This is
important
a
part,
very seductive idea.
right?
Is kind of
Well, this is the idea of capitalism, right?
right.
It's sort of capital gets you guaranteed streams of revenue. Lean into that, right? And as capital gets more powerful, as we get new types of capital coming online, combine that with your existing assets, and you can build something that's durable forever and ever till the death of the universe, right? This is the original promise of capitalism.
In every era of capital, the history of capitalism, there has been a central compelling conceit, and whether it was the first or second sort of industrial revolutions, whatever it was fueling the growth, it was also always inherently, inevitably, an anti-humanistic proposition. It was, we need to take human beings and fit them as better cogs into the emerging machine. Whether that was literal under industrialization, or now, oh, we're having to have all these workers upskill in these bizarre and arcane ways, and it's the same general theme and motif that we're describing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a little bit intimidating, and it's at times terrifying.
But the good news is these are paper tigers.
They are paper tigers, right?
We've
End of the
laid out the
day,
case.
yeah,
Unfortunately, for these paper tigers to go away, all of us are going to be hurt.
yes,
But do not fear their power. Do not fear what they're telling you. It is definitely a bubble. It's not speculative.
and do not give them, if you
Right. If
don't
you
give them tax subsidies.
if don't give them tax subsidies, but also stop hyping their don't take their threats seriously. If you
Yeah,
when you share a story of people firing people, quote unquote, for AI reasons, you are bolstering the narrative that AI can replace people.
Right.
Don't don't feed their game. But by playing in this way, you're playing their kayfabe. So do not
Yeah.
engage with them in this way. Understand this is the bubble. Understand when the bubble pops, you can renegotiate, reassert your power. Right. That's what we're waiting for.
Right. And you can engage in, without getting into the wider concepts of class consciousness, there are very day-to-day forms of solidarity that will be impactful in the marketplace, that will be effective in the political domain. And it starts with not being intimidated and not accidentally hyping the same people who are harming all of us.
Right.
Yeah.
So like that's why I mentioned Bernie Sanders is such a good example. Sanders obviously cares about workers and such, but by going on talking to Claude, talking to Elliot Yudkowsky of all people, who I spent last episode bashing for lots of reasons.
Right.
Um,
Lots of legitimate reasons.
yeah, like that is hyping the capabilities. When Sanders says something like we need to guarantee that the revenues of these companies, by the way, if you're not profitable, are kind of paid into a dividend for citizens because this is a new industrial revolution. He is literally hyping the narrative that this is a technology that is imminently waiting to transform everything, right?
Hmm.
As opposed to a bunch of use cases that have not found a business model that is sustainable, right?
So let's look at this as a kind of spectrum.
Right, because if we prematurely,
Right.
kind of codify, dividend revenues for, or citizens dividends for AI companies like Anthropic and OpenAI, we're kind of, that is a bailout, right?
We're buying into the premise.
We're buying
and
the premise,
then we're
and then we're
we're on the
providing the
hook.
resources
Right.
to enable that premise, right?
Right.
As
Right.
opposed to simply reading the reality. These are paper tigers, right? If you see a tiger in real life, don't engage. See a paper tiger, even less reason to engage, right?
Right.
Back away, right? Don't believe the hype. Don't fall into their kayfabe.
The death by paper tiger is a death by 1,000 cuts. It's never one thing. Let's just torture this metaphor. Let's absolutely kill it here. So, and if each post of, yeah, my company downsized because this reason, that's the first little cut. So avoid all the subsequent cuts if you can. And that's the confusion of all of this. That's the muddying of this media environment that we've been trying to highlight. But there is clarity. And certainly on the day or week or weekend when this various bubbles burst, we'll get ultimate clarity.
It'll be confusing at first, but then the pieces will start to align, and it'll become clear that this was just a bunch of
Yeah.
kids in the trench coat.
Right. This was the ultimate kids in the trench coat. So that's what I was sort of talking about. A spectrum is let's lay this out maybe in less muddy terms. On one extreme of the spectrum, you have NFTs. Large language models are more interesting and compelling and sustainable than the use of NFTs. But
Right.
I want to have the worst possible example.
Right.
Pure hype.
Right.
On the other side, we have like solid use cases that we've already kind of highlighted and that will outlast the subsequent, bubble.
Yeah, and they are much less interesting and sexy than the ones we've been told. And
Right.
we've spent so much money that these use cases actually, I mean, basically we're getting Siri plus. So Siri in the 2010s was for its time kind of novel. Novelty wore off pretty quickly, but I'm saying, initially talking to your
Because you
phone
couldn't really ask her
to do much.
too much. Yeah.
So now
yeah.
we've got Siri plus, and and in some cases Siri plus can do some very sophisticated but ultimately boring business logic like classifying documents and some shit like that.
Right.
We have had technology that can do that, but it's just that now you can use natural language to integrate those processes. It's marginally interesting, but again, what we were promised and what we have spent to get the promise is just not
Spent in the billions.
right, nearly trillions,
Nearly trillions. Yeah.
right, was not worth it, right? So I'm not saying, oh, AI has use cases, it'll be around because it's good. I'm saying
Right.
we got a residual. People are going to use it, but it was not worth the journey at all.
And let's sum this up in as pithy way possible as a concept. This is the classic billion-dollar marketplace masquerading as a trillion-dollar marketplace.
Right.
And that's like, I think that's the best way for people to kind of conceive of this in their heads, right?
Right.
Is there's a lot of value there, but it cannot possibly be earth-shatteringly trillion-dollar that's just impossible.
Right.
Even though the money has been and the debt has been aggregated in these amounts, it doesn't make it real, doesn't make it
Yeah.
true. Say it ain't so,
Right. Say it
because
ain't
it
so.
ain't.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
No, it's yeah. And the other thing is, I think part of the reason why so they're still spending this money because they're locked in. Their incentives demand that they keep doing this. There's no way out for them, right? And when you're cornered, right, you kind of just get more desperate. You kind of
Mhm.
get more willing to fight, right? But initially, I think that the draw of doing this was for the various reasons. Some people generally believe in artificial intelligence. They believe that humans can be replaced by silicon minds, right? But independently of that, a lot of the modalities of large language models actually existed in other machine learning architectures. This is sort of the first time it appeared in one place. And so my thesis that I've not really seen reflected anywhere else is that this was an attempt to enclose the value of other types of machine learning by having a single application or a single technology product that can half-assedly do, you know, text to speech, right? Natural language processing, sentiment analysis, right? All these things were disparate machine learning architectures. Technically, they're not different architectures, but they're different modalities that did not exist under one hood, right? So the goal was basically one ring to rule them all, right? And if you're
Take
the
all of these disparate services, bundle them in a way that you can sell singularly,
right
and
bundle
then
them,
you'd be the man.
bundle them in a way that makes them actually all worse together, because the language model actually doesn't do any of these one things especially well. It kind of does all of them okay, right?
Yeah.
Bundle them together, right? Present it as a everything machine, right? And if you're the one who owns the everything machine, then all of the value will go to you. Talk about the last
Then
enclosure.
you are the Highlander.
This was the last enclosure,
Right.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
So the idea was, we are going to enclose all of the last 30 plus years of machine learning research into a singular product that only we control. The minute, though, the economics did not work out, now we're playing this kayfabe of let's keep pretending we're making God, and the peasants will believe us, and if the peasants engage with us as if we're making God, it'll make us seem stronger, right? Like that's sort of where you get into the sort of the nitty gritty of what perpetuated this bubble. I mean, there's some other pieces too, and I can go into that, but
But this is the central story of all recent history in this area.
right,
Like, now that the wizard, now that we're peeking under the curtain, the only thing that these guys can do, the only thing that the Wizard of Oz can do is continue to funnel debt upon debt into this hole. That's all they can do. That's the move.
right,
And recognizing it and witnessing it and being frankly offended by it is the right reaction. It's the technically and morally correct reaction to all this. And until they start to just shred all the documents Enron style at all of these sort of headquarters, you know, to mark, and that's a prediction I'm making. I'm using colorful
everything
imagery
they're
here.
doing, from what I can tell, is legal. It just, I mean, maybe it shouldn't be, right? The circular economy of buying your own, sending the same $1 billion back to yourself through intermediaries, should not be legal. But I don't know that.
Legal, certainly it's not a felony, but I'm using the colorful imagery of the end of Enron because obscuring who actually needs to be on the hook civilly,
Right.
I do think is something that we're going to witness after this bubble, because a lot of people are going to come up short. Like, that's the nature of it. And
Yeah.
they're going to all have to start pointing fingers, Spider-Man style,
Well, what they're trying to do
you
is
know,
offload this onto us via the IPO
via
markets.
the IPO, right?
Yeah.
And again, that's the next step to avoid the paper cut is, you know, don't buy the hype, and then don't buy the stock.
Right.
And make sure that the places where you are invested,
Don't do that.
or your funds are prohibited.
Unfortunately, with
And
the indexes, though, they changed the rules, so a lot of
they
these
did change the rules, right?
trackers are going to be buying into.
And that's the next move that they succeeded in.
Yeah,
was impacting the
well, at least NASDAQ.
at least NASDAQ.
S&P did not actually up to,
They
basically
didn't.
there's fast track rules that a lot of indexes have adopted that will allow companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, and SpaceX recently,
Mhm.
which actually did IPO, to be on their index. And so if you're on an index, it means that the firms, the funds that are following the index have to buy the shares in proportion to the weight of the stock on the index, right? Um,
And that is these guys getting their hooks into large groups of people.
right,
Yeah.
literally a captive audience.
Yeah.
But I think even those games will not get them out of the hole they're in.
No,
So
the hole is too deep. It's
yeah,
just a question of, can they drag just enough? Like, remember, let's make this a little more pointed. Again, we're blue skying here. Let's go with it. If they get enough members of Congress on the hook through their funds, if they target it in such a way that the regulators and the political class has to save themselves, then that's a good use in terms of
I'm almost certain Congress and stuff are invested in not indexes. They probably are like openly openly
a little
trading
more nakedly
nakedly.
corrupt.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
It's the whole
So
thing.
they are going to be on the other side of this equation. It's just us suckers who are in
Right.
passive investment who are going to be on the hook for
Who are
that.
stuck for it. Yeah. Yeah. So this is, I'm hoping to work us by the end of this episode to, if not a hopeful place, then at least a place
The hopeful
that is
place, I think,
resolved.
is just literally when this blows up, the ground is fertile
Yeah.
for anything else, something else, right? And I don't mean like capitalism. I just mean literally regulatorily and in terms of like what it is we are owed as citizens and as participants in the market. I think the
Right.
ground is fertile for that.
And not
Um,
just owed answers, but owed new and better forms of protection and
governance.
entitlement.
Well, that's what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Like when the lies are out, right? Your boss is lying about being able to replace you.
Mm-hmm.
You'll have more leverage, right?
Because they will have lost the upper hand that they were trying to intimidate us
Right.
with. Yeah.
Now, like that's not as good as saying we will have restitution. We will be made whole. I mean, I believe one day we could be,
Yeah.
but given who's in office, obviously, I'm not holding my breath. It's going to
Right.
happen
We're
anytime
not
soon.
totally hopeful in that sense.
But I am
I don't
saying,
think we'll be made whole until the institution of universal basic income. I think that's the only point that we're headed towards, and that Elon Musk is scared of, and his sort of his cohorts are scared of. So that's my general sort of timeline for this. My political timeline.
yeah, but in terms of all the kayfabe and all the fear of, like
Yeah.
I think
At the present crisis,
right
certainly. Yeah.
that when that goes away, you will kind of have power,
Yeah.
you know, or at the very least, these pressures that have been pushing down on us will be kind of mitigated, abated.
Right. Let's kind of set up a bit of a preview for next time, if you will indulge me, because I think there needs to be, as a next chapter of this examination, an examination of who are the figures on the left and their reactions to these technologies. We already cited Bernie Sanders, but there has been a kind of deafening silence of the normal critics of capitalism and its excesses for what is a truly uh, capitalistic experiment that is the rise of AI. And so let's look forward to that discussion as we do whatever we're calling episode 4 or 5, depending on how we cut it. So yeah, Michael, will you see us off with a recommendation of, besides Misaligned Markets, the best blog on the web, a place people can go and feel more informed on this topic?
Yeah, I think last time that I just mentioned that just John's reporting, it's probably the clearest place where you're seeing the financials of these companies.
Yeah, if you
Uh,
missed it last time, please go read Netitron and get informed.
Where's your ed at?
Yeah,
That's the
where's
name
your
of
head
his
at? Yeah.
newsletter. I mentioned Cory Doctorow too before. Doctorow in June of this year will have out a. So this should be out by the time of this publication, but he's a book called basically the reverse centaur's thesis to the AI bubble, basically, which is like talking about what do we do with AI after the bubble has popped, right?
Right. What is the next step? Yeah, kind of reverse centaur probably should be the top of our emerging reading list on this curriculum, basically.
Yeah. The other one I recommended last time too is AI as normal technology, and I always get the authors' names incorrect, so I'm going to quickly do some Google foo to give you those names. Uh,
Excellent. So people who will, in short order, be on this podcast as well. Fingers crossed.
uh,
Well,
you're really ambitious
I'm so ambitious. I
about
know.
who we can get on.
Yeah.
So Sayash Kapoor is one of the authors. I believe he's at Princeton. He has a co-author Avrin Navarand. So like both of these guys are I want to say they're at Princeton. I don't remember, but they are in the computer science field as academics, and they've been writing about their one of their first books was AI Snake Oil,
That's a great title.
kind of before right around the beginning of the bubble. And their upcoming book will be called AI is Normal Technology, which is kind of going over the hype cycles that technologies go through and sort of where they end up settling over time, right?
And
AI is not going to be capital as labor. It's going to be a more normal technology whose ability to diffuse into the economy
mhm.
is going to depend on sort of like the back and forth between actual viable use cases and the utility that they provide, and then the regulatory layer on top of that, right?
Right,
It's
but
sort of like
it's
a
real
very
utility,
like
not hype
Polanyian
utility.
double movement thing going on, where it's
Right.
like, first they create the product, they say it can do X, Y, and Z, but it only does Y, right? Y has to actually be scoped to regulation and use case, right? So they're setting a picture that describes how most technological bubbles have proliferated. And it's in that sense, I think actually this is a good book too, because a lot of the reason why the bubble happened is one, the media kind of has been hyping or buying the hype of the people selling the product. But two, even historians and economic analysts are kind of looking to the past bubbles. Like aviation was a bubble, so airplanes were kind of a bubble when they were invented. Railroads were a bubble when they were invented. The internet was a bubble when they was invented. Right, all these bubbles had residuals and they diffused and they created lots of value. And so everyone is sort of like looking to the past, saying, "Oh yeah, this is like that thing," right? And it's like one thing about historical, analysis is one, you know the counterfactual, but two, if you're going to compare it to the present, you need to know what about the present is different, right? And so a lot of people tripping over themselves just to repeat, oh, .com was a bubble, it must be the same,
Mhm.
without actually understanding what are the one-to-one comparisons. That's what actually drove me to write my what to expect when you're expecting a bubble, is like I was like looking for this analysis. It's like no one was. It kept saying it's like .com. It's like .com. And it's like, how is it like .com?
Yeah.
Why is it like .com? Right?
Yeah, finding out the common elements and the disparate elements between the rise and fall of pets.com and the rise and death of Amelia Earhart, this is the domain of the academics. This is what we rely on them for.
Yep.
Most certainly.
The other thing, yeah, it's just like we are bound by the reflexivity. If we believe that we are in a historical moment, we're going to act as if we are creating a historical moment, and that's I think the thing we need to grapple with as a society, right? If you say these things, this is the next hype cycle, this is the next industrial revolution, and you act as if it was the case, and people kind of react to you acting that way,
You create your
you
own predestination
create your own
paradox.
reality.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so we gotta, hopefully books like Doctorow's book and and
AI is normal technology,
there's no technology with
which is an intentionally boring name, but please definitely check it out because that's kind of the whole
yeah,
point.
hopefully we can create a new reality where we kind of have people talk about things in a more grounded way
And a better one
for the next bubble, at least.
for the next bubble.
Yeah, it's a little too late for this one.
It's too late for this one, but for the next bubble, we have some hope. So, yes, thank you again for joining us on this episode of The Last Enclosure.
I've been Mike.
I've been Nick, and we'll see you on the next one.
Mike here. Thank you so much for listening to The Last Enclosure. If you like this episode or you like the series, please like or share or leave a review or comment wherever you are listening or watching this podcast. If you want to get in touch with us, please reach out to us at contact@thelast enclosure or visit our website listed in the show notes.